On the morning of June 12, 2022, hundreds of thousands of people woke up and found they couldn't touch their own money. The button that let them withdraw their savings just stopped working. There was no warning phone call, no polite letter in the mail, just a message about extreme market conditions and a door that had quietly locked from the inside while they slept. And here's the part that gets me. For a lot of these people, this wasn't gambling money. It wasn't spare change they could shrug off. These were retirement funds, college savings, the money someone got from selling their house, cash set aside to start a family, or to finally quit a job they hated, or just to feel a little bit secure for once. They had handed all of it to a company called Celsius Network because a man in a bright yellow t-shirt had looked into a camera week after week and promised them something no ordinary bank ever would. That man was Alex Mashinsky. He had a slogan, and he said it like a mantra: "Unbank yourself." To me, that phrase was never really a marketing line. It was a whole worldview, an invitation to join something bigger than yourself. The banks, he told his audience, were the villains. They took your deposits, they lent your money out, they made billions off your back, and then they handed you back a pathetic fraction of a percent. A rigged game where the house always won. But Celsius was different, he swore. Celsius would flip the whole thing over. Celsius would hand the power and the profits back to regular people. The numbers he threw around were, honestly, absurd. A normal savings account paid you basically nothing, while Celsius advertised annual yields as high as 17, even 18% on certain coins. He claimed the company sent 80% of its revenue straight back to customers as rewards. He said Celsius only made safe, fully secured loans to the biggest, most trustworthy institutions on the planet. He told people the bank was the risky choice, and that trusting him was the responsible thing to do. Read that last sentence again, because that inversion is doing a lot of work. Every week he sat down for a live broadcast he called Ask Mashinsky Anything. Fans tuned in by the thousands. He'd answer their questions, calm their nerves, reassure them their money was safe. When the market got shaky, there he was, steady and confident, telling everyone not to panic, insisting Celsius was strong and the doomsayers were dead wrong. That yellow t-shirt turned into a symbol. To his believers, he wasn't some CEO. He was a folk hero going toe-to-toe with a corrupt financial establishment, and they adored him for it. I've watched enough of those clips to understand why people fell for it. He's good on camera. That's the uncomfortable truth. At its peak, the whole thing looked untouchable. Roughly 1.7 million users. More than $25 billion in assets moving through the platform. Available in over 100 countries, adding thousands of new customers every single week. It didn't feel like a company. It felt like a revolution with a waiting list. But here's the paradox sitting right at the heart of this story. The man who built his entire brand on exposing how dishonest banks were, was, according to federal prosecutors and a court-appointed examiner, running something far more dangerous and far less honest than any bank ever was. The safe loans weren't always safe. That 80% revenue claim was, investigators later concluded, just false. The calm confidence he broadcast to millions was papering over a company that had been billions of dollars underwater for years, paying out rewards it could never actually afford, using its customers' own deposits in ways those customers never pictured for a second. And when the door finally locked in June 2022, you could see the scale of the damage. More than $4.7 billion in customer crypto, frozen solid. Over 300,000 people left holding claims against a company that no longer had the money to pay them back. This is the story of how a charming pitch became one of the most personal betrayals in the history of crypto. And I want to be clear about something up front. This isn't really a story about tokens and balance sheets and courtrooms, even though we'll get into all of that. It's a story about trust, about the very specific way a warm voice and a simple promise can talk careful, sensible people into lowering their guard. Because to understand how so many people lost so much, you first have to understand what they were told, who told them, and why they believed every word of it. Every good sales pitch starts with the salesman, and Alex Mashinsky understood that better than most people ever will. Born in Ukraine, raised in Israel, then off to the United States, he showed up in the crypto world already carrying a resume he was very eager to share. Serial entrepreneur, visionary, a man who'd spent decades inventing the future. The big claim he leaned on was that he'd been one of the pioneers of voice over internet protocol, the technology that eventually let us make phone calls over the web. And whether or not that credit was as clean as he made it sound honestly mattered less than the impression it left. Here, supposedly, was a guy who had seen the last great tech revolution coming and helped build it. So why wouldn't you trust him to walk you through the next one? That's the mental shortcut he was counting on, and it works. In 2017, together with his chief financial officer Yaron Shalom, Mashinsky launched Celsius Network. The mission, the way he framed it, sounded almost holy. He wanted to, in his own words, unbank the world. And this is the exact moment the pitch stopped being about technology and started being about morality. Mashinsky told anyone who'd listened that the banking system was rigged against ordinary people. Banks took your money, lent it out, made enormous returns, and handed you back a fraction of a percent while pocketing the rest for themselves and their shareholders. The house always won. Celsius, he promised, would flip that whole arrangement. It would act in the interest of the community, not shareholders. All that upside the banks hoarded would flow back to the people who actually put the money in. And the numbers attached to that promise were, again, staggering. Deposit your crypto with Celsius, and you could earn annual yields as high as 17, even 18%, depending on the coin. In a world where a traditional savings account paid you almost nothing, that was intoxicating. It sounded too good to be true, and here's the thing. Mashinsky had an answer for that objection too. Celsius, he claimed, returned 80% of its revenue to customers as rewards. This wasn't magic, he insisted. It was just what happens when you cut out the greedy middleman and let the profits reach the people who earn them. I'll admit, framed that way, it almost sounds reasonable. That's what made it dangerous. At the center of the machine sat a token called CL. Celsius created it, and Celsius controlled the overwhelming majority of it. The token was the glue holding the whole ecosystem together. Users were pushed to hold CL, and the more of it you held relative to your total deposits, the higher your loyalty tier climbed. Higher tiers meant better rates and extra perks. On top of that, you could choose to get your weekly rewards paid out in CL instead of the coin you deposited, and doing that came with a bonus yield. The effect was clever, and looking back, deeply troubling. It manufactured a steady stream of demand for a token that Celsius itself dominated. People weren't just customers anymore. They were holders, personally invested in the price of CL going up, which welded their emotions tighter and tighter to the fortunes of the company. That last part is what I can't get past. Once your feelings are tied to the price, you stop asking hard questions. But the most powerful tool Mashinsky had wasn't the yield or the token. It was his voice. Every week, he went live online, sitting in front of a camera, answering questions straight from the community. He wore his signature shirts, spoke plainly, and kept circling back to the same reassurances. Your funds are safe. We only make responsible loans. The banks are the risky ones, not us. Week after week, people tuned in, and something subtle happened. They stopped seeing Celsius as a faceless platform and started seeing Alex as a guy they knew. A friend. A protector. This is the strange power of a parasocial relationship, where trust flows one direction, toward a man who was, in reality, talking to a room full of strangers he'd never meet. And it was that trust, patiently built up over all those weekly broadcasts, that would prove so devastating when the truth finally showed up. But before we get to that truth, we have to sit with one question. A simple one, really. The kind of question that should have kept every single depositor up at night, and somehow almost never did. Where does the money come from? Just think about it for a second. Your local bank might offer you 0.5% on a savings account, a little more if you shop around. Celsius was offering 17%. 18. On some coins, more than that. Numbers so far past anything in normal finance that they should have set off alarms instantly. And yet millions of people looked at those rates and felt nothing but excitement. They forgot the oldest rule there is when it comes to money. Yield is never free. Somebody, somewhere, is always taking a risk to produce it. And if you don't know who, and you don't know how, then the uncomfortable answer is that the risk is probably yours. I keep coming back to that line because it's the whole game. So where did Celsius actually get the returns to pay all those depositors? The honest answer is that it went hunting for them in the most dangerous corners of the crypto world. When you handed your Bitcoin or your Ethereum to Celsius, it didn't sit in a vault somewhere. It got deployed, shipped out into the sprawling, experimental universe of decentralized finance. Lent to trading firms and hedge funds. Poured into yield farming strategies with names most customers had never heard of in their lives. Locked inside complicated smart contracts that could only earn a return as long as everything kept going right. Some of these bets were just risky. Others were flat-out reckless. Celsius lent tens of millions of dollars to Alameda Research, the trading arm that would later blow up alongside FTX. It dumped customer money into the Terra Luna ecosystem, chasing those eye-watering yields on platforms like Anchor Protocol. It bought illiquid assets, tied up billions in staked Ethereum, and even funded crypto mining operations down in Texas. None of this was the careful, collateralized lending Alex described on those Friday broadcasts. This was a hedge fund wearing the costume of a savings account. And the people wearing that costume were counting on you never asking to look underneath it. And here's the part that changes everything. Celsius was paying out more than it was safely earning. I don't mean it stumbled once or twice. For most of the company's life, the rewards it promised customers were bigger than any yield it could realistically and safely generate. A court-appointed examiner would later confirm all of it in a report 600 pages long. Sit with that for a second. 600 pages. The rates weren't set by looking at what the investments actually returned. They were set by looking at the competition. Celsius picked numbers designed to beat rivals and pull in new users, then went scrambling for returns to justify the promise after the fact. That backwards logic is the whole story, honestly. Do you see the trap forming? A gap opened up. On one side, the interest Celsius owed. On the other, the money it could actually earn. That gap had to get filled somehow, and it got filled with more risk. Bigger loans to shakier borrowers. Lending that was under-collateralized, or in some cases not really secured at all. The exact thing Alex swore, again and again, that Celsius would never do. I keep coming back to how brazen that is. Every quarter the machine needed more fuel, and every quarter the fuel had to burn hotter. There was only one way a structure like this survives. Prices had to keep climbing, and new deposits had to keep pouring in. As long as the bull market roared and fresh money showed up every week, the gap could be papered over. New deposits quietly covered old obligations. Rising asset values hid the losses buried underneath. It all worked beautifully, right up until the second it didn't. And that, to me, is the tell. Anything that only works while the sky keeps rising isn't a business. It's a bet. Because that's the fatal flaw in any model built on endless growth. It has no plan for the day the music stops. It just assumes the party never ends. And crypto, of all things, does not go up forever. So you had two companies living inside one name. Publicly, Celsius was a fortress. Safe, responsible, smarter than the banks. Privately, it was leveraged, exposed, gambling with money that belonged to people who had no clue the game was even being played. Two Celsiuses at once, and pretty soon only one of them would be left standing. To understand how they kept the illusion breathing, you have to understand the CL token. Celsius made its own cryptocurrency, and this wasn't some side experiment. It sat at the center of the whole story the company wanted to sell. A rising token price signaled a healthy, thriving business. It reassured investors. It rewarded loyal users who held their coins. And it made Alex Mashinsky look like a visionary whose bets just kept landing. One problem. According to the Examiner, CL's price was never really about demand or value. Celsius controlled as much as 95% of every CL token that existed. 95%. And around 2020, the company started pouring money into buying its own token on the open market. Not to use it, not to hand it out, just to shove the price up and hold it there. Think about what that actually means. The token didn't climb because the world believed in Celsius. It climbed because Celsius was the buyer. Investigators found CL's price moved so closely with the company's own purchasing that you could practically lay one graph on top of the other. Celsius bought, the price rose. The market wasn't setting the value. Celsius was manufacturing it, plain and simple. And where did the money come from? At least partly from the deposits of ordinary customers. People who handed over their savings thinking they'd earn a safe return were, without ever knowing it, bankrolling a scheme to inflate a token they'd been told to trust. One Celsius employee described it in internal chat as, quote, very Ponzi-like. That wasn't some outside critic taking a shot. That was someone in the building, watching it unfold in real time. Now stack Mashinsky's own behavior on top. While he publicly told customers to hold their CL, believe in the long game, stay loyal, he was quietly selling. Between 2018 and June of 2022, prosecutors say he dumped at least 25 million CL tokens and walked away with more than $68 million. There was even an internal document, and its name tells you everything. It was labeled Mashinsky's bag, and it tracked his weekly token sales. Read that name again and tell me they didn't know exactly what they were doing. His co-founder Daniel Leon sold nearly $10 million worth. The message to the public was hold. The move behind the curtain was sell. All of this while the real business hemorrhaged money. Celsius told the world it only made fully collateralized loans to top-tier institutions. Internal messages said otherwise. Executives knew the unsecured lending was growing even while Mashinsky denied it on camera. The company lent $75 million to Alameda Research, the trading firm that later went down in flames with FTX. It piled into the Terra Luna world through Anchor and Curve. It dumped customer funds into illiquid assets, mining operations in Texas, staked ETH locked up in tangled smart contracts. Whistleblowers later said the company had no real risk models at all. I still find that staggering. Billions of dollars of other people's money run on spreadsheets. And the losses stacked up right on cue. In a single year, Celsius ate roughly $800 million in losses from these bets. By mid-2021, it was already more than $500 million underwater. By the end of that year, it owed around $1 billion it simply did not have. None of it reached the customers, though. Mashinsky kept doing his weekly broadcasts, calm and sure of himself, telling people their money was safer with him than in a bank. Inside, the mood was nothing like that. Executives passed messages on Slack and Telegram about managing perception, about how to avoid setting off a panic. At one point, leadership even talked about hiding the true scale of their ETH exposure by moving to wrapped versions of the token on-chain, harder for outsiders to trace. That's not a company solving a problem. That's a company hiding one. The gap had become a chasm. Reassurance on one side, a balance sheet quietly coming apart on the other. And in the spring of 2022, the ground under both was about to give. By early 2022, the conditions that had pumped up the whole crypto market were quietly going into reverse. Central banks, spooked by inflation, started raising rates. Cheap money had fed years of speculation, and now the faucet was tightening. Investors who'd been chasing insane yields started backing off, looking for safety. Prices softened, then slid. For a company like Celsius, built entirely on the assumption of ever-rising deposits and ever-climbing token values, this wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a threat to its existence. Then came May 2022, the moment a slow bleed turned into a hemorrhage. Terra was one of the most celebrated projects in the space, built around a so-called stablecoin called UST that was supposed to sit steady at $1. Its sister token, Luna, held up that promise through a complicated mechanism that had always leaned on confidence far more than collateral. Investors poured billions in, lured by yields too good to poke at. Anchor Protocol dangled returns near 20%, and money flooded through the door. That number alone should have been a warning to everyone, and it wasn't. Celsius was in that world too. It had funneled big sums into Terra-linked platforms, chasing the same impossible yields it kept promising its own customers. But something in the machinery at Celsius must have flickered awake. Shortly before the collapse, the company quietly yanked more than $500 million out of Anchor. Luck, instinct, a glimpse into the pit. I don't think we'll ever really know which. What we do know is it wasn't enough to save them. In the second week of May, UST lost its peg. The dollar it was supposed to be worth slipped to 90 cents, then kept slipping, and the panic took over. As investors bolted, the mechanism meant to defend the peg went into overdrive, minting Luna by the billions. Its price didn't just fall. It vanished. In a matter of days, a token once worth over $100 was worth fractions of a penny. Tens of billions of dollars in value just stopped existing. I've watched a lot of crashes, and the speed of that one still unsettles me. The shockwave spread outward. This was contagion, the thing every fragile institution lies awake fearing. Confidence in the whole sector cracked. Prices fell across the board. And every company that had leaned too hard on borrowed optimism suddenly faced the same brutal question. What happens when everyone wants their money at the same time? At Celsius, that stopped being theoretical. Nervous users started pulling their funds. A trickle became a stream. The problem was ugly in its simplicity. Celsius didn't hold those deposits in reserve. The money had been lent out, staked, locked in complex smart contracts, sunk into a liquid stuff like Bitcoin Trust shares, staked Ethereum, mining rigs in Texas. Assets you couldn't sell fast, or sometimes couldn't sell at all without wrecking their own value. The company was running on a promise of liquidity it could no longer keep. Inside, executives scrambled. Frantic attempts to shore up positions, to find capital, to buy time. But the math had been against them the whole way. They'd been over $500 million underwater as far back as mid-2021, and by the end of that year, they owed roughly $1 billion they didn't have. One single year had swallowed around $800 million in losses from risky bets. There was no secret vault to reach into. And still, in front of the cameras, Alex Mashinsky held the line. He waved off the alarm as FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, his favorite phrase for dismissing anyone asking hard questions. He told customers Celsius had plenty of liquidity, that the platform was strong, that there was nothing to worry about. It was maybe the most dangerous kind of confidence there is, because by then Celsius had become exactly what one of its own people once called it. Something very much like a Ponzi. A machine that only ran as long as new money kept coming in and prices kept climbing. Now both had stopped cold. The dominoes were going over, and there was nothing left to catch them.